Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, brought to you by Salesforce, the global race to AI. Ylli Bajraktari, President and CEO of the Special Competitive Studies Project, joins the podcast ahead of the group's AI Expo in June. It's Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's dive into the day's top headlines. Office of Science and Technology Policy Director Michael Kratsios criticized diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in federally funded research, calling them closed-minded in a speech Monday. During remarks before the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, Kratsios called for a reduction of red tape in scientific research and fostering what the Trump administration is labeling gold standard science. Under that standard, there would be a, quote, suspicion of blind consensus, he said, arguing that there is a crisis of confidence in scientists that comes from fears that political biases are impacting research. Kratsios specifically pointed to DEI as antithetical to that mission, echoing a common refrain for the Trump administration, which has sought to rid the federal government of such programs, positions, offices, and research. Kratsios said, quote, DEI initiatives in particular degrade our scientific enterprise. He continued, DEI represents an existential threat to the real diversity of thought that forms the foundation of the scientific community. His remarks at the National Academy of Sciences, a non-governmental membership organization aimed at promoting good scientific principles, comes as the Trump administration's efforts to reshape the federal government have impacted federally funded research. The National Science Foundation, for example, has canceled hundreds of grants that don't align with Trump administration policies, such as those that mention diversity, equity, or inclusion, and outlined plans to get rid of a division that focuses on equity in STEM education. Kratsios said scientists can't, quote, be in the business of scoring points for an ideological agenda, and that those DEI considerations impact the research itself. He said, quote, a closed-minded political fashion preoccupied with symbolic victories divides colleagues and distorts grant application and research design. In other news, the General Services Administration has entered a government-wide buying agreement with Salesforce, the parent company of Slack, to reduce the price of the enterprise version of the workplace productivity and collaboration tool by 90% per user for federal agencies. GSA said in a press release Monday that it renegotiated lower fragmented discounts from individual agency deals for a deal based on total government purchasing volume for Slack Enterprise Grid, resulting in a steep discount for agencies that will expire on November 30th, 2025. The two parties also reached an agreement that will lower the price of Slack AI for enterprise for agencies by almost 70% off per user. Salesforce, which acquired Slack in 2021 for $27.7 billion, is the latest commercial software vendor to reach a government-wide purchasing agreement with GSA this year, resulting in lower costs for agencies. Google and Adobe also entered into agreements with the Trump administration since its inauguration. GSA and Microsoft also arranged a similar deal that came just days before the Trump administration entered office. In the announcement release, GSA touted its, quote, central role in procurement, maximizing cost savings, reducing redundancy, and streamlining IT acquisition with consistent pricing and terms across the federal government, as well as its so-called OneGov strategy for IT procurement that it unveiled last month. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, make sure to visit fedscoop.com. As the United States, led by the Trump administration, charts its course as a world power in AI, the nation's adversaries, particularly China, are taking major strides as well. As such, the decisions made today in this race to AI will define the character of competition and conflict for years to come. Ylli Bajraktari, President and CEO of the Special Competitive Studies Project, joins the podcast to characterize this global competition from a defense and national security perspective ahead of his organization's massive AI Expo, June 2nd through 4th at the Washington Convention Center. Let's go now to that conversation with Ylli Bajraktari. Ylli, welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast. So good to see you again. How are you doing?
Good to be back, Billy. Thank you. How are you?
Doing fantastic. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You seem to have the pulse for it seems like as long as I've known you over the last several years on the AI and national security space. For those who don't know, the Special Competitive Studies Project was really birthed out of the National Security Commission on AI, which you served as executive director. And with SCSP, your mission is pretty simple, really to provide recommendations on how to strengthen America's long-term competitiveness as AI and other emerging technologies are reshaping national security. I hope I got that right. I think that kind of sums it up. Correct me if I'm wrong.
But that was perfect, Billy.
But in addition to that,
plans even from my team about the mouthfulness of the title and the mission and everything. But hey,
but it's an important mission, and you guys do a great job. From that, the genesis with the National Security Commission, and now with the continuation under SCSP. But in addition to the recommendations and the work you guys do there, sort of giving thoughts on how America and the nation can do a better job as a competitive player in the global AI space, you've also done a really good job, I think, objectively, being a player in the AI event space, putting on one of the best multi-day conferences at the intersection of AI and national security, the AI Expo and the Ash Carter Exchange, and that's coming up here soon. So let's start there, because I think that's the thing that's on the top of your mind, and we're really excited about it. So what makes this event different from any other AI event that you might expect to find in this space within the AI national security Washington, D.C. intersection?
So Billy, I think when we started the journey, the one thing that I think as well is that for the first time in our history, there's a really powerful technology being developed by private sector, and that primarily is centered around traditional regions in the United States. The Silicon Valley, the Northeast corridor of Boston, and when you are in a competition with China, you cannot have our government really be so detached from what's going on in the technology space. So in our mind, when you think about public-private partnership, we thought we should just do that. And by doing it, we thought about organizing the biggest AI Expo in Washington, D.C., where we bring, from the small tech companies to all the biggest ones we have, those that are at the cutting edge of these technological changes across not just the AI, but also the entire technology stack. And so last year we tried our hypothesis for the first time. So at the convention center last year, we brought 13,000 people over the course of 2 days to enjoy, a range of conversations on the future of AI, on how you govern AI, on biotech, quantum, all these technology stacks. And it was a massive event. I think it was the biggest event in DC of this kind. We had about 150 exhibitors, because our goals was not just to have conversations, but actually, companies and government to showcase what they're doing with technology. And so we had 150 exhibitors. More than 50% of those exhibitors were private sector companies, from the smallest one we have to the biggest ones across the technology stack. About 30% were government agencies, from Department of Energy, showcasing the work of their labs, to Department of Commerce. And then the rest were university institutions and allies and partners. And so given the sense of how good last year's event was, we thought we should do it again this year. So June 2nd through 4th at the Convention Center in Washington, D.C., we're repeating the event again. But this year is going to be bigger. We have more space. We have more players involved. We have other events that I'm happy to talk to that are happening at the expo, because this is not just, exhibitors. We have a bookstore where you can come and meet authors of the best books that were published in this space for the last 12 months. You have a drone competition area where we're bringing our services, so military services, over the course of 3 days will compete in this drone cage, where the military members can fly first-person view drones through obstacles, and we will announce winners after the third day. We have a hackathon that is happening on another floor, where we will bring 300 hackers from around the world to work on some critical AI applications on science, national security, and you name it. We have multiple tracks there. We have 3 stages. You mentioned one of them, the Ash Carter Exchange, where we'll bring the top military and civilian leaders to talk about the military innovation and, reinforcing the legacy of late Dr. Carter. And the other two stages will serve as like primary stages where, tech CEOs, government officials will talk about technology, policy, and whatnot. And so it's a massive event, but I'm also really proud because we partner with a lot of organizations, companies, allies, and partners so they can do side events. And so we have other additional rooms on the same floor where, companies like NVIDIA or partners like us that we have in India are organizing side events on conversations related to technology, competitiveness, national security. So I'm really excited about this. It's a 3-day event. Last year we had a 2-day event. So I'm excited about this because we have about 305 events, 35 panels. Right now we have confirmed 200 speakers, but the number is going to grow as we get closer to the event. So if you're a passionate person about technology, what's happening in the near future, in the long future about AI, I think this is a 3-day crash course in everything related to technology, in particular about AI.
That's awesome. And it's incredible to see it grow. I'm curious, just as listeners think about, attending and what they might look forward to there, what are you most excited about of all those things you said? And what do you hope, a potential attendee walks away learning?
I mean, Billy, thank you. That's a great question. First of all, I forgot to mention the event is for free. So you can just go online at expo.scsp.ai. You can register for free. And then, as always for these big events, you have an app. And then you can build your own journey. If you want to follow the quantum path, you can always just enjoy the quantum conversation, see demos on quantum. Same on biotech and AI, obviously. I'm excited about it all, Billy, but as an organizer, I feel like I will miss everything. But obviously, we'll post everything online then, and I'm happy to catch up with a lot of events because there's so many, and there are so many good conversations. I'm passionate about all the topics, but I will probably be bogged down in some conversations, moderating some others. We have an amazing list of guests coming from out of country, from our allies and partners nations. People coming from the governor, state level leaders. But it's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to that. I told my team this morning, I wish it was tomorrow because I'm so excited that I wish it was happening tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of preparation, and I'm sure you're ready for the day to come. And I think our conversation today can sort of serve as a preview for what the conversation might look like at the event in a couple weeks. So I'd love to also sort of dive into your perspective on AI and competitiveness in the national security space, and sort of where the U.S. nation stands among some of its peers. And so, like, a simple question to start, this broader conversation. You've had, as I said, the pulse on AI and other emerging technologies in the space for quite a while, whether it's with SCSP or the AI Commission. How have things progressed, and where are things today, particularly with AI, as we see it become even more of a critical player in national security, defense, and other mission essential sort of operations for our nation?
No, I mean, you're right, Billy. I think these things have moved so fast from our last conversation, and not to mention since 2018 when I got involved with the AI Commission. I think two things are happening right now. Number one is, I think on the U.S. side, I think there's obviously a race for building the necessary infrastructure that we are positioned for this future, right? Because as you know, every new model has uncovered sort of like the demand that it has for the energy, for hardware, for data centers and everything else. So I think we are on the cusp of really outlining what that necessary infrastructure for the future of AI will look like, because this will demand huge energy, enormous data centers, hardware, necessary to build these bigger and powerful models. Needless to say, our major companies are going towards AGI, and we can talk about that later on, but they all have AGI in their mission. And so I think our goal as a nation is always to win and be at the cutting edge of the AI. On the other hand, I think, as you can imagine, China is not slowing down. I mean, of all the rivals we have out there and competitors, China is the most serious one because it has the scale and the scope really to compete with us. And I think the DeepSeek release and other releases we will probably experience in the near future showcase that China is really a serious competitor in this space.
Yeah.
I always describe the competition as a dynamic competition, because I think in technology we will never have a moment like in the nuclear weapons space or in the other arms races in which you said like this is the moment the competition stops, we won, they lose. I think this will always be a dynamic competition. China is a serious competitor. They have enormous resources, incredible talent that they produce from their universities, and as I said, they have a scale in which when they deploy these capabilities, they can learn much faster, they can get feedback much faster, and then they can deploy better models. My personal opinion is that the competition will bog down to not whoever has the best and the latest models released, but the nation that adopts AI faster across all the sectors. So public sector, private sector, academia. And so I think that is one area that I wish we can do better, because I think AI, and I personally believe this is going to change the future of education, future of healthcare. So we just have to be mindful that we need our people to play with AI more, adopt it faster. That's how we will learn the limitations. That's how we will learn the risks. China doesn't have these problems. I think The Economist in April had an incredible chart in how deployment is doing in China versus the United States. As you can imagine, the deployment, the sentiment about AI in China is much, much positive, much widely accepted. In the United States, it's still a lot of risk averseness associated with AI. So I think as we uncover maybe better medications, better healthcare pathways to address some of the issues we've faced for many, many decades, I think that might serve as a trigger point for our people to really believe that AI is really the future.
Yeah, and that's so interesting when you put it that way. And I'm curious, is it when it comes down to that risk aversion or really trying to get folks to engage in it, is it an educational thing? Is it a cultural thing? How do you kind of take a bite out of that apple?
I think it's all of the above, Billy. I think you're right. First of all, I think if you look at China, I think they've started to adopt AI now at the elementary school.
Wow.
And so we just have to be, I think education really as that intersectional change now, because when you look at our educational system and across the Western world, it's still a replica of the industrial age. You go to school for 4 years, you go to grad school for 2 or 3 years. But I think that system is now probably for the first time facing a different reality, because I don't think with AI you need to have a 4-year college. But I think that will change to like an incredible model that we are used to for many years that has a business side to it, the economic side, the employment side. But I think our goal should be to prepare young people for the future of workforce that we need. We talk about bringing manufacturing jobs back. I think the future of manufacturing is advanced manufacturing that includes robotics, that includes, if you listen to Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, he talks about the future being AI factories that require AI managers. And so it's just a different shift in terms of how we build the workforce of the future. Obviously, we don't want to end up in a situation 3 to 5 years from now when we will have job displacements that will cause huge wave of unemployment. So these next 3 years, we should be really mindful in terms of like how do we retrain, reskill our labor? How do we build an educational system that people really get the skills needed for this future? China doesn't have this problem, as you know, Billy, because they have a top-down system in which if the party directs the nation to learn AI from the first year of the elementary school, that they adopt it, they deploy it, they don't have, they will have a different sort of like path towards the future. Obviously, I'm not advocating we replicate China, but I think AI really could serve as a trigger point for us to, rethink some of the things that we have never thought about it. And I think educational system is one of them.
And before we move on, I want to bite on one other thing you mentioned earlier in the conversation. You mentioned AGI, artificial general intelligence, and some of the firms that are kind of moving in that direction. Obviously, right now, generative AI is the big thing. But when do we get to a point where we take that step forward, or what's the sort of progression looking like from your perspective?
Yeah. So I think there are multiple, hypotheses about this, Billy. I really like to ground this on a realistic conversation that, look, obviously all the companies are seeking to get to AGI. which is like human level intelligence that can do all cognitive tasks that you and I can do, Billy, right?
Hmm.
Um, Now, whether that is GPT-7, and we're now at like 4.5, and maybe by the end of the year, OpenAI releases GPT-5. So are we talking about GPT-7 or 8 and 9? I think they're all racing towards that moment, and they're all building the necessary infrastructure. I also think that my personal opinion is that this will require a public-private partnership because this require a massive rethinking of our infrastructure. You need permits, you need energy resources to be built, you need data centers to be located, and so I think the administration is rightfully focused through the Department of Energy to enable that infrastructure. And I think these models will continue to progress. I mean, as you know, since the release of ChatGPT, we have had probably more than 30 models released until now. Every model has been better, faster. I think if you look at the first wave of the models, they were more like chat box. You ask and it would respond. The second wave really came more in terms of reasoning, and it's like remarkable now whether you do Gemini 2.5 Pro or OpenAI 4.0. When you look at the reasoning that they go through in terms of providing you the answer, it's a remarkable progression since the first release of
Yeah.
ChatGPT. So I think we will see this progression. I think the infrastructure is going to support it underneath it. As I said, I think China probably is not going to slow down in this space too. And so I think this will be a dynamic. And I believe in this decade, we will probably get to some models that probably will wow us in terms of like capability that have reached. Are we going to call them AGI? We'll see. There are many either there are other there are some technology companies now that are performing intelligence tests, and the level of human intelligence these models are performing. And so I'm sure we will get to a point in which one day, as everybody has indicated, in this decade, we will get to that moment that we have reached some kind of a model that can perform at the human intelligence level.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting to hear. And I appreciate your thoughts on the public private partnership because that makes total sense. The government's got to play some role. And that's where I wanted to go next with our conversation because we have a new administration. And while they haven't outright introduced their plan, their strategy for AI, they're kind of working on it. They've released some requests for information. And obviously, there's indication that something will be coming. There are some signals that they've put out there in terms of how they want to treat AI in terms of regulation and things of that nature. You mentioned the energy side of things, and they've made some stances there. So what signals have you gotten from the Trump administration 2.0 on how they plan to support AI development short of any guiding policy?
Yeah. So Billy, for the listeners that don't remember, Trump 1 actually came up with our first AI strategy. I think now it's been such a long time ago that people forget, but you know, back in 2017 or 18, we produced the first AI strategy as a country, and it's a really remarkable document. It's not very detailed like the Biden administration's EO, but it provided for us, and I was doing the NSCI back in the day. It provided for our country the first AI strategy. Um, I think you're right in terms of we have a new approach to how we're going to do AI, both adoption and deployment. In terms of government adoptions and use, I think last month the White House released an EO that really called on for government agencies to really focus on what we have always advocated for: high consequence cases. So, focus on where the AI application will do most harm, either in the individuals, groups, ethnicities, and whatnot, rather than just have a blanket like AI, high consequence adoption. And so I think you will see an acceleration in terms of AI investments, AI adoption. I think those are the signals we have seen now. As you noted, the White House issued an RFI, and I think that the document probably should be released sometime in July. And I think compared to the previous administration, I think this document will probably call more for the acceleration of the AI adoption and deployment because, as I noted, we just live at different times. In 2025, I think the release of DeepSeek, the infrastructure that is being built, I think it requires for our government to really step up and really think more proactively of how do we stay on top of this critical technology going forward.
So, Ylli, as we close out, I'm curious, we've talked a bit about where we stand in terms of AI capacity within the nation and sort of what some of our counterparts have and might not have. What are the, and just as a closing thought, what are the biggest gaps that you think we need to be focused on today? I think you mentioned some of them, whether that's sort of that infrastructure or other things, but also put another way, what are the opportunities? What are the things you hope that people will focus on growing in the near term future so that we can make the US a more competitive player globally in this space?
Yeah, so the one thing that I think we should try really hard to avoid is cutting the basic science research and development. Because when you think about it, Billy, traditionally our country has really operated that triangle of innovation where, government was providing the funding for basic R&D to universities. That's where the research was happening. And then the private sector would scale these products, right? And I think we risk at really shortcutting our advantages by limiting or even cutting science funding, which is, I think, being talked about. You see cuts happening at the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health. I think this will damage us in the long term. This is where, the talent was coming from around the world. This is where the cutting edge research was happening, not just on technology, but on health and education and everything else that kept us really going and out innovating our competitors. So I think we should really try to avoid that, because I think that will cost us in the mid to long term harm to ourselves. In terms of the opportunities, I think I mentioned education and health are probably the two biggest ones, because if we get AI right, Billy, we have an opportunity to have AI personal tailored assistance for every kid in our country. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing math now and AI is personally helping your kid get better and better, I think that's an incredible opportunity because, we always have needs for teachers and academic researchers. And in this case, these models can help fill that gap. And if widely deployable, it can reach any remote area in our country. And I think that's a huge opportunity. Health also is amazing, because when you look at combination of AI and bio, what AlphaFold has done at Google is incredible. And as Demis Hassabis has noted, in the next probably 1 or 2 years, you'll see the first results in really trying to address some of these illnesses that we just reached, the end of research, probably because of lack of, compute power and just data. And I think those will be maybe opportunities, because I think longevity is really the next step in how we address some of these issues and enable for our people to live longer, work. And so I think we are at that cusp now that probably first sparks will happen in the first 2 years that will show us opportunities. But again, I think from a government perspective, I think government has to step in and provide that vision about, how is the future of a workforce going to look like? Obviously, it's not going to look like it's looking today. So how do we manage to transition that? I oftentimes talk about the candle letters of New York City at the beginning of last century. When electricity was invented, that profession died within 5 years. And then the union died within 7 years. So, how do we make sure that we don't end up in a situation of people that are doing the candlelight jobs of today in 5 years are unemployed? And so as a country, we need to have a strategy for these things. And I think at SCSP, we really try to fill that gap. We constantly produce these reports. We try to look over the horizons on the opportunities and challenges of these technologies. And this decade really will set the foundation, I believe, for the rest of the century, Billy.
Well, that's a really cool analogy, I think, the candle letters, and I think it's a good perspective to have and an important one so that no one's left behind because that's a key to success in all this. But, Ylli, I think we had a really good conversation where we really touched, I think, the tip. Probably there's so much more to talk about of what people will hear at the Expo in a couple weeks. So I thank you so much for your time. You're really an expert on all of these topics, and I can't wait to hear more. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Billy.
For more on the global race to AI, visit fedscoop.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Daily Scoop podcast, available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people to find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back tomorrow with more top headlines. Until then, I'm your host, as always, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.